Hello, this is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Dot Dialing YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything related to mysticism, magic, religion, and everything on the fringe of esoterica. And welcome back to another Occult 101 video. Occult 101 is my long-running flagship series on this channel where I give sort of introductions to broad esoteric topics that you can take in this information and then springboard off into further research. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the sacred hearth and all the magical practices associated with the hearth. It may seem strange that I'm talking about the hearth because I feel like as a subject, it is one that is often neglected in modern spiritual discussions. There is a lot going on because we all have a sacred hearth. It's just, are you tending to its flame? Hearth itself is basically a word for fireplace, and this hearth was the center of the ancient house. It was critical. And nowadays we neglect this. You don't need a literal hearth in your house to tend the sacred hearth because all of our homes have a spiritual dimension to them. Yet too often modernity has told us to teach our houses like kind of just a dwelling place, a place we reside in, and to ignore everything that's happening within the house beyond what we can see with our eyes. That raises a question: what is in the hearth? What are the spirits in our home that reside with us? Because we are not alone. The greatest myth is that when you're in the dark and nothing's happening, you're alone. This is not true. So within the home, there are a number of spirits that reside here. Very literally, there is a type of spirits that's known under different names in different cultures, known as kind of house spirits, where basically in your house, in your stairwells, there are these little tiny local spirits. They're very low tier in terms of the divine hierarchy, very low power, that kind of coexist with us. And they're viewed differently in different parts of the world. In Europe, they were kind of their own class of spirit, but sometimes they would overlap into ideas like the Fae. In specifically the Celtic Isles, the idea of the Fae was a very pertinent spiritual idea. And the Fae were not seen as these fluffy little fairies that gallivant about and they're like pixie hollow type stuff. No, they were actually rather feared. Fae were seen as kind of these malevolent earth-based spirits that coexist with us and often create a lot of mischief. Some people even correlated them with demons, and I mean demon in the Christian sense of the word, as in malevolent, lesser earthbound spirit. That is what I mean by that. And so, Fae were feared. Actually, in Wales, while in broader Europe during the Christian period, there was the witch trials and the witch hunts, they were actually on these Fae hunts. And in Wales, they would actually persecute specifically children that they thought were changelings. They thought these kids were half Fae. Often, unfortunately, this meant that they were persecuting disabled children, which is bad. That was bad. But what I'm saying is there was a large belief in the Fae. And there are a number of creatures around the world that kind of parallel the Fae and how they interact. Because the Fae lived in a parallel life and can interact with humans, and in some folklores have children with humans, kind of similar to how in the Arab world there are the fire spirits of the jinn who coexist in a parallel kind of reality too, and can also have half jinn children. So there's a number of beliefs about this, but basically, universally, there are these spirits of this plane, spirits of this earth that we interact with and that are around us. Specifically, if you have a garden or a yard or some amount of property, in your yard, it is generally believed that there are a bunch of different spirits. And so there were a lot of superstitions, specifically around Europe, about things you would put in your yard or by your doorstep to sort of deal with the spirits that reside outside of your home. And inside of your home, there were a number of traditions and things people would do to deal with any spirits that might be in their home. That's why when you look at banishing rituals in Western esotericism, often the way a banishing ritual is performed is you will invoke a higher spirit, such as an angel, to then banish lesser spirits. So you're not banishing with just your own spiritual power, but with calling something above to send something out. And if you look at Christian prayers, because these beliefs are interestingly things that are kind of pagan survivals, when societies convert religions, a lot of the culture sticks and a lot of beliefs kind of don't go away. Beliefs are transmuted and changed, but they still are there. And so a lot of these spiritual beliefs predate Christianity or Islam or whatever an area was converted to, and then after conversion they take on new forms. That's why you see a lot of prayers about getting rid of these spirits. Though not all of these spirits were seen as malevolent, there were a number of spirits around us that people actually connected with in a positive way. And that brings us to sort of two ideas: the genius loci and the land spirits. So it is broadly believed that there are spirits of the land, spirits of this place. And that is why when you go to different places, you feel something spiritually different. If you say you know, like you're an American, but you're like an Irish American and you travel to Ireland and you feel this innate connection to that land. That is sort of a land spirit ancestral connection going on there, right? There's something metaphysical to that because each land has a different spiritual quality to it. And there are different land spirits every locality. There are spirits of the river, there are spirits of the trees. And if you look around the world, you see these ideas continue. So this Mount Everest, a sort of, you know, thing that has become kind of a like tourist climb thing at this point. It was broadly believed that that mountain itself had a spiritual nature to it, and then people who were going to climb the mountain, specifically the Sherpa people, would do specific Buddhist rites to prepare before ascending that mountain to connect to the spirits of that land and hopefully be given favor before going on such a treacherous journey. If you look to Australia, there are beliefs that a number of the volcanic formations around Australia are spirits of the volcanoes. So this kind of animistic quality follows through when we think about our relationship to the land and the place. And this should all be considered when we think about the hearth, because the home is placed upon the land. And to understand the spiritual dimension of the home, we must understand the spiritual dimension of the land and everything that connects these things. Because to tend to the hearth, you must understand what the hearth is. To reconnect to your spiritual lineage, to grow, to understand these things, you have to have awareness, you have to have mindfulness. I think the term mindfulness has become so watered down. I think it has become one of the like favorite words of corporate spiritualism. It's like the word synergy. Like, what does synergy mean? But mindfulness itself is important if we think about what it actually means. Developing awareness is key, and animism as a concept is not really incompatible with any religion. You can view different spirits of lands and places differently, like you could perhaps see them as malevolent or perhaps see them as positive, but this belief, this fundamental idea that there is some spiritual essence to what is around us is critical. And it actually, that very simple idea that was sort of the first religious idea permeates all religions after it. And even the most complicated metaphysical systems that we understand still has this fact. The statement, there is no separation, is one of the most critical ideas in Western esotericism, which is why you will see that diagram of the tree of life sometimes drawn as circles in these sort of around itself, right? Showing that there is no separation and everything is fundamentally interconnected. And understanding that simple idea and following it all the way through is tantamount. Now, moving beyond the literal spirits of the land and of the house, which are obviously the first thing to recognize, there are actually a number of other spirits that relate to this idea of tending the sacred hearth, which is of course our goal when discussing this entire premise, right? Hearth magic as a concept is all about this tending. It's about understanding this flame. So the other spirits you're going to interface with is firstly ancestors. So a key part of tending the sacred hearth is understanding your ancestors and venerating your ancestors, because in a home, there is often a shrine to the ancestors. And in the pagan worldview, the ancestors are critical. It's one of the things that distinguishes it. I mean, in a, obviously like a colloquial understanding and in an academic understanding of paganism. But this idea is not just a pagan idea. Look around the world and you will see shrines to the ancestors in homes everywhere. Every religion incorporates this to some extent. And so honoring your ancestors, understanding their place in your hearth matters. Nowadays, we're a very atomized society, right? Everyone lives in their own little pod, their own little bubble, and we ignore our connectivity and our collectiveness with the humans around us. Because when you are doing a ritual, when you are doing a spiritual practice, you are in a sense rejecting this and kind of connecting with the lineage and that connection of every single person who has done this ritual prior to you. I was told once in a spiritual lecture that it is almost kind of like a time travel of sorts. Obviously not literally, we're not literally time traveling, that's insane, but you are connecting to those who came before when you honor them. And so when you are understanding the hearth, we need to look back, because now the hearth is neglected. And so we need to understand what our ancestors did and how they related to it. Depending on who you are and what tradition you follow, you should look at what those people did and try to understand how your ancestors related to the hearth specifically. That can be incredibly helpful. Now, something I mentioned way at the beginning is that one of the groups of people who talk about the hearth the most would be people who venerate hearth goddesses. So let's talk about hearth goddesses. So in the home, specifically in pagan Europe, there was an idea that there are specific deities that represent the hearth and the home. And these deities, the two that I think of and the two that I've honored previously are Vesta and Brigid of Ireland and Vesta of Rome, respectively. But basically, there was an idea that there were these specific goddesses who this was their domain. But what's interesting is that a lot of these goddesses also have other epithets to them. And looking at what these other epithets are can give us keys into what the hearth represented, because the hearth was more than a place where we slept. Like, Brigid also represented fire. And what's interesting is the hearth, this term that we use, is also a term for a fireplace. So the home, it's obviously seen as comforting and warm, but what does fire represent? Fire is energy, fire is growth, fire is fertility, fire is all these things. And all these things relate to things that go on inside of the hearth. And so when we think about, say, like how a woman would go on a spiritual journey related to the sacred hearth, these goddesses can be really good guideposts, because these goddesses had massive cults. And Brigid specifically is really interesting because she was a Celtic pagan goddess, but when Ireland was converted to Catholicism, there became a saint known as Saint Brigid, and a number of her devotees and her iconography overlapped, being a sort of pagan survival of sorts. Now, Vesta had a number of other attributes, and those attributes, such as her relationship to femininity and womanhood, and her cult, the Vestal Virgins, which is basically a group of women who pledged their virginity, and if they lost their virginity, they would be put to death. Obviously, we're not doing that up in here, but they would tend to her flame, and she had a literal flame in Rome that was tended to and honored, and her cult largely centered around this. And so you see this fire motif comes again. And so how would someone related to the divine masculine connect to this current too? Because while they will relate differently, like say if you're a divine feminine person and you're connecting with the sacred hearth, you might leave offerings to these goddesses, there are still ways that men can relate to this as well. Hephaestus is a deity that I think of. He is the deity of, a number of things, craftsmen, all that type of stuff. He's seen sort of building things and all this imagery, right, around like construction and whatnot. And that is also a hearth idea too, because the divine masculine, we think about these two things. What is the divine masculine? What is divine feminine? The divine masculine is force, it is generation, it is construction. The divine feminine is form, it is shaping. And so Hephaestus builds the sacred hearth, and then Vesta and Brigid kind of tend to it. And so you see this divine masculine, divine feminine connection and principle, which underlies all metaphysics, interacting in this specific concept. And so depending on who you are, you'll relate to this differently and practice this differently and honor different spirits. But it is a common tendency in the pagan world to, in the home, venerate some sort of hearth deity. That is seemingly pretty universal. Obviously, pagans did not worship literally every deity. That is just, there's not enough time in the world. But there are certain ones that people would gravitate towards, and hearth offerings were very, very common. So keep all of that in mind. So now that we understand what the sacred hearth is and how important it is, let's talk about how we can tend to our own sacred hearth. The first step is to recognize. I really suggest sitting down just in the middle of your home and trying to meditate, clear your head, and understand what is around you. I think trying to take time to notice the spirits in your place. Are there spirits more on your stairs or in your kitchen? Like, where do the presences change? Where does the energy shift? Is really vital, because as you move throughout your home, you will notice that there are different vibes. I'm sure we all have been walking through a neighborhood and suddenly the neighborhood changes and things feel really different. Being aware of these things is important. We are so taught in this age that rationality is supreme and that the intuitive, all that should be neglected and ignored, but that is the ultimate lie. We need to learn to trust our gut and trust what is outside of the constraints of our minds. If we want to understand the spiritual, we need to develop this awareness. Now, the next step would be to build an altar and to orient your home around this idea, right? Step 1, clean your room. I know that's basic. I've said it before. It's important. Your space is your microcosm. And as we know, the basic formula of ritual is as above, so below. The microcosm and the macrocosm's connection and how they interloop with each other. So if you affect the microcosm, you affect the macrocosm. So if you clean your house, you clean your mind and you clean your spirit, because physical health, mental health, spiritual health are all linked. They are inseparable. As I said before, there is no separation. So keep all of that in mind. Now you're going to build an altar. You can take a space in your house and set up a table. I like to face mine east. That is my personal choice. There are a number of other ways to orient your altar, and this is going to vary depending on your specific spiritual tradition. In general, in the West, east is most common. as that relates to the sun, but I do see some people focusing it west. Some people focus their altar towards a specific place. If, say, like, you know, you worship gods that are originally from a different place and you're not living in that place, you might want to face it towards that place. Or you could recognize that north, east, south, and west, respectively, all correspond to different elements, and then focus it towards the specific element that makes sense to what that altar is for. Or you can break it up and have a number of altars. I know some people who have different altars for, like, one for their deities and one for their ancestors. Depends on how you want to set that up. But putting an altar space in your home is really important because obviously they look pretty, but that's not their purpose. Some people on the internet act like that's their purpose, but that's not. It is a home for your spirits within your home. And it does orient your space in a spiritual way. Now, another thing you can do is leave offerings regularly, specifically leave offerings to Hearth goddesses. For me, when I'm cooking, I like to set out a little bit for Vesta, because that just makes kind of sense to me, and I give it to her, and that develops a connection, because all spiritual interactions are relationships. They are back and forth. So just like your relationship with another human being, you have a relationship with the spirit. And it should not be viewed as a transactional relationship, but as one you would have with someone you admire, look up to, and is a guru of sorts. They are above you in the hierarchy. You should venerate them as such. You should not have this kind of entitled, egocentric worldview where you think you are equal to the gods or better than the gods. That is destined for failure. Don't do that. But respect them and understand that it's not like I put in thing, I get thing. That is a very toxic mindset. There is no spiritual ATM. And there is no buying enlightenment either. That's not gonna happen. So develop the relationship and tend to it, right? Give attention to things. You can't just do something once and expect it to happen. It's like you can't eat a salad once and then look like Bella Hadid. That's not how things work. You have to be consistent and disciplined. I think daily practice is critical for this reason. Now, another thing you can consider is, you know, orienting how you like adorn and set up your space according to spirituality. There are a number of esoteric disciplines devoted to this. Feng Shui got a lot of attention a couple decades ago, and that is an entire system from Eastern esotericism about how you set up your house and how that relates to the energies of the house. And I'm not like a Feng Shui girl, like it's not something I'm really into, but I have noticed when I change how things are oriented in my space, it does change sort of the energetic quality of the space. So keeping all of this in mind is really vital. I mentioned earlier in the video the spirits besides the gods that relate to the home, the land spirits, the genus loci, the spirits in your house. And developing a relationship with these spirits is also very, very helpful. Now, one thing to note is not all spirits should be treated like gods. You do not worship the land spirits, but you honor the land spirits. You venerate them. Honor, veneration, worship, they are all different ideas. And so no, you do not interact with all spirits the same. They don't all work the same. They are not all positioned the same because there is a design and a hierarchy to this universe. It is not just random. So treat different spirits differently, but developing a connection to these spirits is also incredibly valuable. And there's one last note I would like to leave this with. If you are someone who lives in like a really small space or a city or something like that, you are not cut off from these things. There is still these things going on. Cities have spiritual poles in them too, and the cities are built on the land. Parks have spirits, the waters have spirits, and cities themselves are buzzing with energy of people. So don't think that if I don't have some beautiful, idyllic cottage, I can't do this stuff, because you can. In the ancient world, even people who lived in near centers were still doing this stuff. It's not an exclusively land thing. I think people get this idea from like aesthetic videos and stuff, but life is not an aesthetic video, nor is spirituality an aesthetic video, because there are both positive and hard moments in spirituality, but both of these moments make us better. They forge us and they make us stronger. And these Hearth devotions can forge us and make us stronger and make us understand the interconnectedness of everything even better. So consider all of this. It can really make a difference in your spiritual practice. And it's relatively simple. You don't need to be a spiritual expert to do this stuff. You don't need to be a master magus who, you know, does all the things. Anyone can do this. And this was done by everyone. I hope this has helped you. If you want to support me, my name is Georgina Rose. This has been the Darling YouTube channel. I am mostly supported through Patreon, so please join my Patreon. You get extra videos every month, early access, and you get to meet with me once a month and do like a mentoring thing if you're a high enough tier. So it's all a lot of exciting stuff happening there. And I also write ritual guides for every single month with like 5 different rituals you can do with like literal detailed instructions. So you can just kind of follow along or change it a bit if you're a bit more experienced. So I hope that's all helpful. And you can find me on all sorts of platforms. I'm on TikTok, Telegram, Substack, Twitter, Instagram. I'm literally everywhere. There's very few places that I'm not. And if you want to donate directly and not to my Patreon, I have a Venmo and a Ko-Fi. So thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you're subscribed for 93 days, you'll be your whole guardian angel, and you don't need to worry about any of this ever again. All right.